And we're back to the Rucks. Number 16 in the 50 most relevant. He's been a top-line ruck premium for the last couple of years. Can he do it for one more? Or will we see injury just hurdles and become an obstacle to start the year? We will talk about Rowan Marshall and his fantasy relevance for 2025 on this episode. Joining me on the podcast for his second time around the grounds on the 50 most relevant. He is the host of the AFL Fantasy Fanatics. He, Guesty, Jordox, the gang do a fantastic job. Bales, good to see you, mate. Talking about a guy that I know pre-injury you were pretty bullish on, but still there's some glimmering hope that maybe, just maybe, he'll be right for round one.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, I'll put it out in the universe. Said I was set to forget December, and as Holmes said, I've got to stick to it. But unfortunately, Marshall going down with that. It's weird. The same day, stress fracture of the pelvis for Marshall and stress fracture of the femur for Philippi. Two injuries you don't really hear much of, and in the same day was pretty crazy. And unfortunately for not only fantasy coach, but St Kilda as well, two of their best players being out as well. But it'll be good to chat about Rowan Marshall and sort of partly what we thought and what we think about what he's going to be doing in 2025.
Yeah, it's so true. Look, ruck eligible as he has been for the better part of his career. Although there was a period of time there was ruck forward, and oh my goodness, bring me back to that year, please. He had a seasonal average of 117 last year in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, meaning he is a pricey brother, the priciest in those formats. $1.2 million is what he's going to set you back in AFL Fantasy, and not too far away in Dream Team, while a seasonal average of 112 means he's over that $600,000 marker. And my goodness me, did he have some big scores last year? His seasonal high in AFL Fantasy was against the Dockers. That's also his career high, a 171. And in that same game, we got a season high 169 in SuperCoach, but just add 4 more points. Go back a couple of years. That's what he did against the Hawks to a career high score of 173. Bales, for the better part of 2 years now, if you've owned Rowan Marshall, with probably 1 or 2 week exceptions, you have just absolutely loved what he has given to you, because he's got a low floor about him that really doesn't hurt you too much. He's got ceiling about him. And then he's so different to all these other traditional ruckmen we have, where hitouts might not be the only avenue to point generation. He gets involved in all dynamics of this heavy St Kilda ball movement game. And if you've had any piece of Marshall, with the exception of one game last year, you have just loved every single second of it.
He's really part of what the modern day ruck is essentially just that extra midfielder. We've seen like your Brodie Grundys, your Tim English, even Gawn to an extent. Like, he's not as mobile as an English, but Gawn also fills all the stat lines. They can get you 20 touches a game. They can get you multiple marks, multiple tackles. Obviously, their hitouts is already that base. And Marshall's part of that as well. But you accompany that with the fact that he's part of St Kilda, who are one of the most fantasy-friendly teams for us. They score a lot of points, one of the highest-scoring teams in any of the teams. And they also play under the roof at Marvel for half their games of the year as well, which is also great because it means that there's always good conditions, unless there's the odd occasion where, for some reason, Melbourne have left the roof open and it starts raining. But I'm sure they'll close the roof for that. But yeah, Marshall gets it done. As you said, there was just that one game last year where he was injured against Port Adelaide, at Adelaide Oval with the injury. So if you were to take that out where he scored the 73, he averaged 119.1 from the other 22 games from 87% time on ground. So, and that's including the 62 that he scored against Tim English, which I don't quite know what happened in that game. Can't really remember. Then the Gawn one where he got towed up for a 63. So those two weird games, he shows that he has a couple of floor games a season, but he still averages that 120. So if you're putting him captain or VC, you're more likely getting a 120 plus score, if not even a 130s, and he's shown that he can hit these 150s, 160s. So he's definitely someone that we have to consider, but this injury has thrown a little bit of a spanner in the works to start the season, as he's a bit touch and go for round one, unfortunately.
Yeah, I want to get your thoughts on that and the mindset for coaches that were considering him in a moment. But you bring up this incredible consistency of gameplay to 100. And then the conversion rate. Like, this is a 2-year trend we've seen. 18 tons last year in AFL Fantasy and 11 consecutive ones to end the year. Like, talk about a player that you just could throw that VC or C on with confidence against any opponent. It was absolutely there. He has 10 scores over 120, 4 over 140, and 3 over 150 in AFL Fantasy. He was an animal. He's the top player across the comp for points and for average. There was nobody better in AFL Fantasy last year than Rowan Marshall, and that is still with multiple games of absolutely rookie territory scores. Then you check over in SuperCoach. He's ranked 11th for points, 14th for average. He's the third best ruckman, though, for points and average last year. 16 tons. A monster 11 of those converted into 120-plus scores. So there's your captaincy scores. 4 over 140, 2 over 160. Imagine putting the VC on a Saturday afternoon on that, just knowing you can rest easy a little bit. The captaincy dilemma is done for the round. He consistently did that, not just in 24, but in 23. 20 tons in AFL Fantasy that year, 10 over 120. 16 tons in SuperCoach in 2023, 11 over 120. We know a fit and healthy Rowan Marshall gets just freedom to be the number one ruck. And as you mentioned, Bales, just it gets involved in every dynamic of the game. Like, his hit-outs aren't anywhere near as high, both the volume and the hit-out percentage of winning compared to other rucks. But then you go and check some of his other stats line, like his tackles, his kicks, these other components of how he gets involved in the game, let alone nearly averaging a goal a game. This is a pure, tall ruckman that is absolutely playing as an additional midfielder, as you mentioned so beautifully. But Rowan Marshall, bit over a week or two now, news came out. We really got double slapped in the face in one news article from the Saints. So thank you, St Kilda, for just making it one big hit rather than just dropping that news gradually and just letting us down like we're at some year 10 school formal where every girl says no. It's like the whole class of girls just say a universal no. At least you can deal with one giant rejection. And that's what we got from St Kilda, with Mateus Philippou confirmed out for multiple games into the season. Like, we're talking around 5, 6, 7 before he's back. Rowan Marshall, a stress fracture in the pelvis. And touch and go, Bales, is the phrase that we're hearing to be ready for round one. I know you were keen on him prior. How dampened are you as someone that was bullish on Rowan Marshall, and for very good statistical reason for it? Can you now choose to start Rowan Marshall with such a question mark sitting over him? Or is this now abort plans and look at something else?
Short answer is no. Definitely not. I've thrown the baby out the bath water. It's all done. No, you can't. I don't think you can start him, and I think that's the case for all formats as well. I don't think you can. I think there was an argument in SuperCoach where it's like, well, he was the third ruck anyway, so you probably were more looking at your Gorns and your Cherries and even an English Darcy, guys like that have got those ceilings in prior years. But with the fact that there's this, because he's such a big guy, it's a pelvic stress fracture. He's not going to be running. Like, he's going to be off his feet for a little bit. So he's going to have that conditioning phase as well. Are we even going to get to see him in any practice games? You'd probably say no. If he's touch and go for round one, he's probably not likely to play pre-season games. And I've always had a rule for the last few years that I've followed when I've taken fantasy a bit more seriously, is that I don't like starting any top price players that have got any sort of question marks whatsoever, whether that be role or more specifically injury concerns. Like, if they have a little hiccup for a week and then they're back, it's fine. Like a Max Gawn larynx injury, I wouldn't be too fussed about picking him in whatever format. But someone like your Walsh, you guys have chatted about, obviously he's been out for a month with a hamstring injury. I'm probably not going there because that's a few injuries now for Walsh. But Marshall, the fact he's out for a lot of preseason, I can't see me picking him, I don't think, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's fair enough too. I agree. I think with so much uncertainty about if he'll be right for round one, to me, I just think the answers are no. I know from a fantasy football perspective, we try to impose our ideologies and views onto how a club should do certain things and think, nah, push him, get him right for round one. If it's touch and go, he'll be fine. But while me and the media landscape and even some St Kilda fans doubt very much if they're going to be pushing into finals or not. The reality is, what have you got to gain to rush arguably one of your most irreplaceable assets in Rowan Marshall for a game or two when you've got another 20 odd to come? Like, there's just no benefit for St Kilda here. Do it right. Get him ready. Build the load back in. Build that confidence back into his body. And if that means he's playing round 3 or round 4, you're not gaining anything or losing anything, should I say, by being conservative from a club perspective. So I'd be shocked if St Kilda rush him to be ready. If he's named round 1, let's hope and believe that the club will have done the right thing by him, and I think they will. But I'm with you. I just don't see a world where he's right for round 1, and with such a big layoff, I just don't think you can go there. Yeah. However, I want to ask you, Bales, because you were so keen on a set and forget strategy, I want to pause on that for a minute. I've been not anti it, but I've pushed against it for a couple of years for a number of reasons. Talk me through the thought process, and using Rowan as the person, let's take the injury factor out. What's the ideology for you that you believe a set and forget ruck structure is the right approach? And the reason I want to ask you is, again, I've been really clear through the 50 that I think you should be looking for value in at least one of those two positions. So I'm not going to respond too much on your thought process. I want to give you the space and room for it. But talk us through the ideology for you of why set and forget is an appropriate structural way to go. Again, we've got an injury and Rowan's obviously discounted out of that. But what's your thoughts on why set and forget can work?
Yeah, so just before I quickly go on that, you're talking about rushing potentially Marshall back, and you don't need to do it. We saw that last year with Clayton Oliver. We saw Melbourne rush him back, and look what happened. He had a good good opening round of round 1. One of the two he had a ton against the Dogs, and we thought, here we go, Oliver, he's back. He take a few weeks, but here we go. But we've seen players in the past that have limited pre-seasons that come back late. It's like they're running a 1,000-meter sprint, but they're starting 250 meters behind everyone else. They're never going to catch up to everyone else because they've got that fitness base they're continuing to build on, whereas Marshall won't have that, especially if he misses his practice game. So I just thought I'd say that Oliver, I think, is a bit similar to that. But in terms of set and forget, I think this year's very different to last year in terms of rucks. I normally do. For me, it's year on year, and I assess all the options in terms of what I'm going to do, set and forget or not. I tend to steer more to set and forget because we've seen year after year teams use multiple trades in the rucks, whether it be a couple of years ago with someone starting a Flynn and then he was out, or a Braden Pruce and he was out, or there's other options as well that have unfortunately failed for us. Last year we had Gawn, Cherry, Grundy. With the three of them there, you started 2 of them. Potentially some people started all 3. But if you started 2, one of them failed, you go the other one. A lot of people went from Grundy to Cherry after round 1, or Gawn if you started Cherry. Mm-hmm. This year I wasn't as confident in the mid-priced options compared to set and forget. Whereas I looked at Cherry Marshall and think Cherry's got no competition. Marshall didn't have much competition. Harry Boyd signed. I'm sure we'll chat about him a little bit later as well. But I didn't quite see him as big of an issue. I still thought it was going to be Marshall as the number 1, but it was still a slight flag. Whereas you look at De Koning, Pitney's still going to be there, still a risk. You look at Jordan Sweet, Ivan Soldo still there. Have we got enough for sample size to see is Jordan Sweet going to be the 90, 95 plus averaging player that we need him to be? Sean Darcy, long injury history. Jackson's still there. I don't think Jackson issue. It's probably more just the injury history. He's gone off to obviously Doha. That's a big concern. So close to season as well. He wasn't doing any match sim either. Is he going to play practice games? Matt Flynn, apparently still the number 2. Apparently is Bailey Williams still number 1. That was Nathan Schmuck saying that. So that's quite interesting to hear that. So he's probably crossed that. And Toby Conway's got 100 guys there that could Rucks, Reece Stanley, Sam De Koning. So who knows? So there's just all those other guys. There's a few other guys like a Briggs, a bit more expensive, early buy, Meek early buy, a few other options. But it was just those 2 guys I felt safe in. Whereas now I think that all the other options have got to be assessed with Marshall being out, I think.
I think that's right. It was when an injury comes like this, and we've seen it now multiple times through the preseason to relevant names, whether it be a Nick Newman, whether it be to a Sam Walsh, whether it be to some more structural pieces like a Marshall, a Philippou, and a Kitty Coleman. We can't just plug and play in mindset all the time. We've got to go, well, I picked this player for a reason, or I like this positional asset for a reason. It shouldn't just be next in that price range that I can afford. It should be, well, hang on a second. I now have the opportunity to reconsider. Have I missed something? Has something evolved and changed that I've noticed? You mentioned the Matt Flynn versus Bailey Williams for a moment. If that is true, those that have been looking at a Matt Flynn, it's like, well, that news has evolved potentially. So now I could look at that differently. So don't just grab, and which I love that you talked about, is don't just go Marshall in, well, who's the next best premium ruck on a forward? It's now that this issue's here, everything can be reconsidered again. I need to be open to other worlds of possibilities. And it doesn't mean I won't do a set and forget. It doesn't mean I won't pick a value forward. It doesn't mean I won't do whatever. But it just means you're not getting locked in tunnel vision to an ideology that was locked into one specific player that informed your structure, rather than your structure being informed by the value elements and the positional elements that sit through there. You mentioned Harry Boyd, Bales. I'm keen on your take. I know you're South Australian based, dominated the Sandful last year and has for a number of years now. Just a brilliant second tier competition ruckman. What do you believe the Saints have recruited him for? I've got a perspective, and I know you've got one too. If Marshall doesn't play early, it's a fair assumption that Boyd sneaks into that spot. But do you believe the two can coexist in the same team?
Yeah, it's really interesting because obviously for a few years we've obviously had Marshall solid. We've always had Tom Campbell in the background. And just to reference, Tom Campbell came in for the 2 games last year. Marshall still scored a 105 and 119. So he still turned up in those 2 games. The other games were when he was solo ruck and just had a poor game. So I think he still plays 50% CBAs regardless if he's got another ruck sharing. It obviously just takes that edge off of the 120s, 130 ceiling. As you saw, both games he went 100, but not over 120. I still thought that Harry Boyd was more a replacement for Tom Campbell and would come in maybe if they were up against a Max Gawn, maybe they go dual ruck setup. It might be game to game. It wouldn't be. I don't think Harry Boyd was coming in to be you're the ruck and Marshall you're playing forward, because St Kilda still got Max King, Anthony Caminiti, Mitch Owens. They've got a few of these forwards there that can still play. So adding Harry Boyd, were they going to play them every week? I think it's a bit too tall for my liking. Obviously, I'm not the coach, so Ross could be different, because he has mentioned in past times that he likes the look of Marshall forward. But I think Marshall offers so much more as that ruck, an extra midfielder around contest, that I think Harry Boyd was coming in to be backup ruck. It's changed, though, because of the Marshall injury. I think that Harry Boyd is, my guessing is, I think he'll play round 1, regardless if Marshall's available or not, because if Marshall is available, he's still coming off a limited preseason, wouldn't have had much match fitness leading into it. They're probably going to play 50-50 split, and Boyd will be the guy that plays mostly in the ruck, and then they'll swap. And whether that goes on for a month, 2 months to the bye, who knows? I would say maybe it's going to be shorter term, and maybe Marshall gets back to hopefully full fitness. But we know that these stress fractures can flare up as well. Like we've seen with plantar fascia, it's different on the foot, but that can flare up. I think stress fractures are also things that can flare up as well. So that's the one thing. They're going to be conservative with Marshall, as you say, with the fact that St Kilda probably not looking like they're going to make finals. Obviously, we don't know, but I don't think they're going to rush him back just for him to have another flare-up and then potentially be out for the remainder of the season and not get any games into him. And then you've got a whole year and that continuity is sort of completely gone after the last 2 years of him.
Yeah, I'm in a very similar sentiment to you. I've heard a lot of that. Well, Boyd's here to support this tall forward structure to allow Marshall to play more forward, and fundamentally, I would disagree with that. I would say Boyd's not there because of Marshall. Boyd is there because of what they picked up in the draft. They picked up what many believe was the best young ruck coming out of the under-18 levels in Dodson. Probably didn't expect to have him there, at least according to all of the Phantom Form guides and what Cal Toomey and other experts were saying. I don't think many people expected Dodson to go so late. And so St Kilda have gone, well, we've now got the best, quote-unquote, young ruckman in the league. Let's develop him. And so I think Boyd's there because they've made the decision that Heath is still not quite ready. Dodson is now the development in the future. We need to protect that with a supplementary selection here. And Boyd does that for us. So he now protects us from exposing Dodson and Heath. And now if there's a week or two that due to injury, they either may choose to roll share or play in solo, I think that's the most likely scenario rather than this is the new twin tower ruck approach that we have seen other teams just come to do. That doesn't line up with how St Kilda move the ball and how Ross Lyon structurally, historically, likes to move the team. Yes, Membry's out, but you can't tell me that a Boyd or a Marshall are anywhere near the type of replacements. And as you mentioned, I feel like their talls, when fit, are really pretty clear and actually quite a nice dynamic too. So I'm with you. I think Harry Boyd, while a likely R3 that will get some games, I wouldn't want him at R2, and I don't think he is the pairing with Marshall for anything more substantial than building loads and or protecting Marshall should he be injured and missing games. I think I've landed in a similar space to you here, Bales, which is if he was fit and had an uninterrupted preseason and you wanted a premium ruck, he sits in the conversation. But now, with such a big issue and layoff, you just can't do it. I do want to ask you one last thing before we hit draft, and that is, often when we're going either set and forget or paying for top-line options, it's because we believe there's a pathway to retention and or a little bit of excess scoring that can come. I know you highlighted that, removal of that Port Adelaide injury impacted game, and now all of a sudden he's knocking on the door of 120s. Do you see a place where any regression might come for Marshall? Again, we've both ruled out the twin tower ruck approach. Do you see any other pathway to regression, or do you just think once he's back fit and firing, he'll be in the mark of what he has been the last two?
I think this injury is pretty much guaranteed that there will be regression. With the last 2 years that we've seen from Marshall, he's had full pre-seasons, he's played all games. He's been so durable for us as well. I think that's why we're a bit shocked at the injury, because he's been such a durable ruck. I can't remember the last time Marshall missed a game. He's been one of those guys that's just been so durable. And even Max Gawn, to an extent, is a bit like that as well. He hasn't missed any games. I know he missed a game, I think it was a couple of years ago against Brisbane, had that knee injury or whatever early in the game. Missed a few weeks after that. Might have missed one game last year. Besides that, they've both been the two guys that have been really durable. So I think that we've seen players in the past as well. I talked about with Oliver. They don't have full pre-seasons. They're not going to be at their best for most of the season. There's been very few scenarios where a player has gone on to be as good, even with limited pre-season. So I can't see him going near that 120 mark, obviously we spoke about. Can he average over 110? I think he still can. I think it's probably not going to be the 116. It might be the 110, 111, 112 potentially. But more likely it's probably a 105 to 110 average, which that puts him behind a few of the rucks. And I know you guys spoke about Gawn and English. Potentially English takes that step back up. If we'd Gawn would fit Petrarca and Oliver back in the team. Melbourne hopefully improving, trying to go for obviously top 4, top 8 again. Does Gawn average 115 for a whole season? So I think that's an interesting topic now. Whereas, do you still go set and forget, and do you look at the options and go, okay, I like Gawn or English, or are you like, okay, the set and forget scenario is dead for me because I wanted Marshall Cherry, and do you go a De Koning, a Sweet, a Darcy, someone like that? I think that's the interesting debate, because as you said as well, the R2 for Boyd, I'd be rolling that out. If something goes wrong, you've got nowhere to go. You've got to make essentially do like, what's that game operation? You got to be taking things out, moving everywhere. It's probably a 2-week process to get cash. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, it's a different approach in SuperCoach. We've got the flex or dream team where it's like, well, I can flick him at the flex and I can juggle it and make it a bit easier, but I definitely couldn't do that. I think what people should be hoping as the best scenario from a fantasy perspective would be Marshall comes back in a shared ruck function with Boyd. Not because it's what the new normative will be, but because it's easing him into his workload. And for 2 or 3 games, Boyd and Marshall have an element of role sharing, and we will see his price drop drastically based on how inflated he is at the top. You've always got to outperform your average to hold your price point. If we see that come back with a little roll share, he could become a value pick, in and around that 100 price point you're getting him. And now he becomes the parachute pathway to getting two premium rucks, but not having to pay it. So whether it be you're jumping off Darcy after 4, 5, 6 weeks, you start to get concerned if De Koning is doing fine, but the Blues aren't getting it done. Does Pittonet come? Those that are looking for some more value approaches at R2, that would be the hoped pathway you're looking for, and not setting yourself into, I'm going Gawn, I'm going English, I'm going Cherry, I'm staying in set and forget. I think the hoped intent here, and what's given us a natural understanding for a look, is we could be getting a 110 premium ruck at around that 100 price point, and then I would be looking to absolutely jump on. So that's absolutely the mindset I'm looking at the moment, and is hoping for a slow developmental start and then jumping on when I feel like the price is right. But all that goes out the window, Bales, when it comes to draft day. At the coaches panel, we choose to draft on the platform of Keeper, but the good news is there are more platforms and options than ever before. So wherever you want to draft, you can choose to draft. Just here at the coaches panel, we choose to draft on the Keeper platform. He's historically been a first-round pick in AFL Fantasy over the last 2 years, arguably even a number 1 pick in some drafts, and SuperCoach late first, probably more likely second, but regardless, he's an R1 and a top-tier ruck. The question I have for you isn't, will he be someone's first ruck selected? The question is, what round do people go, and how scared off do you see people getting on draft day when it comes to Roma?
Well, when you first suggested Rowan Marshall for us to do this episode, I was like, cool, draft, don't have to worry about it. No, pick 1, pick 2, you're sorted, it's fine. That's completely gone out the window now, because I think with this injury, I think he falls. This is really, really interesting, because it's going to be very draft dependent and who you're drafting with, because I don't think he'll be a first-round pick now. I think he's fallen now the first round with his injury risk. I think you've got your Cherry, obviously, will be probably the consensus number 1 pick. I think Sheasel moves up a slot. I think you've probably got a Gawn, might even move up. You've got these mids as well that are a lot safer to average around that 110 marker, whether that be a Zach Merritt, an Errol Goulden, Andrew Brayshaw, Jordan Dawson, whoever. They all probably move up. So, and then you've got your Bailey Smiths and a few of the forwards. So it comes down to the second and third round, and I'm probably not going to be drafting him in anything, because I'm probably not going to want to take him in round 2 or 3, because I'll still be nervous about that injury. So does he keep falling? I can't see him falling outside the third round. I think third round is the lowest he would fall, and someone would go, you know what, there's the upside of the number 1 pick. Potentially, if he comes back, I'll take him. If he fell to round 4, I'd probably then look at it. But I can't see him falling past round 4. So for that, and I think it's pretty similar in SuperCoach as well. I know he's not number 1 or 2. Obviously, you got your Gawns and stuff like that will probably go ahead of him, but I still think he's probably fallen out of the first round, and pretty similarly, probably rounds 2, rounds 3, I think is probably where he'd fall. Is that probably where you'd see it as well now with that injury?
Yeah, he's definitely not a first-round selection. For me, the variable that actually defines how far he falls is the main one being, what is his time of return based on when you choose to draft? If you're drafting on that weekend that Shiva drafts, of just off the back of opening round, and we've got a pretty good line of sight probably from the club of if he's going to play in round 1 or not, I don't think the draft slide will be too drastic. However, if it's like, yeah, look, he's probably not going to play till rounds 3 or 4, well, this is where that cascading pain can come that you alluded to, where he could drop a couple of spots, but he will then get to an undeniable value piece where someone will go, I will be without my 3rd or 2nd or 4th selection on draft day, but I don't care. I just want the best ruck I can afford in this spot. So I think for me, that's the variable that changes everything, and how big of a bottom out, as you've alluded to, is coming. But yeah, the only reason he goes in the first round now is someone doesn't realise he's injured.
Yeah, exactly. Or
pretty simple to me.
Like auto draft or something like that, and someone hasn't clicked on. But I think it's a really good point you raise, actually. If you draft in that week leading up and he's played a pracky game and he's done everything right and he's looking good, I think he would probably slide back into the first round, maybe towards the back end of it, because that risk. But he probably falls a bit up, rises a bit up there. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think he's one of those ones that is going to shape the draft. I think one of those picks that's going to, where's it going to happen? What's he going to do? So it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, mate, absolutely a pleasure to talk with you again on the 50 Most Relevant. I know you're busy with the Fantasy Fanatics. Bunch of stuff has landed for you. And I believe just inside the last 24 hours, a much in-demand series for the Fantasy Fanatics has returned.
Yes, yeah. My little baby, as I like to call it, the head-to-head series is back for its short series. Started yesterday, I believe, when Patreon people, I think it was today. I think for the actual listeners listening onto the podcast and that, it was yesterday. True. So, Warn Dog was the first episode, so make sure you jump on with him. A couple of Bulldogs forwards chatting in Riley Sanders and Matt Kennedy. So, two very relevant ones. So, check that out. But, yeah, we got heaps of content. Obviously, it'll be daily in season, but we've still got heaps of stuff to get through. Obviously, we're itching very, very close to match sim games and the real juicy sort of what we want to see on the screen. We want to see, like, the games. We want to see where players are playing. So, all that discussion. And plenty more. And there's a couple of things in the works potentially that might be released for the start of the season. I'll let people know. Follow me at BalesDT if you want to start to date with that. I'll let people know. But yeah, the head-to-head series is back. And make sure you go and check us out at AFL Fantasy Fanatics, wherever you get your podcasts.
It's awesome. All the details for where you can get in touch with Bales or the Fantasy Fanatics crew on X, where you can download the podcast, or you can subscribe over on YouTube. Maybe you're watching this episode on YouTube. We've attached their name and their handle in the title of this episode, so they don't have to go too far to find it. We've made it super duper easy. There is not a day that goes by in the preseason, let alone season proper, that I don't think Bales and the team are posting content. So they are absolutely flying this preseason. Make sure you go check it out. If you're an AFL fantasy player, you'll definitely enjoy that. They've got some great fun stuff that they do that nobody else does in the community, especially during the season with watch-alongs and stuff like that. It's absolutely brilliant. Make sure you go and check that out. If you want to get all the details for, you can get in touch with Bales and the Fantasy Fanatics. Details in the description of this episode. And also, it's where you can get in touch with us across social media. Check out our Patreon. They have got a ton of great new stuff just over the last couple of days. And you can get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch. If you order it today, you'll absolutely have it in time for the season proper. Seriously, there's a gift that we give people when they purchase something from the store. Only people that have got something know what I'm alluding to. But the caps are just flying out the door. So if you just want to take care of the hat, maybe you've got some baldness you're hiding, or you're just not happy with your hair day, whatever it is, that's going to take care of you. All the details for those are in the description of this episode. By the way, two things. One is a clue, one is something new. Just yesterday, the Coaches Panel launched our brand new spin-off baby podcast. It is called Finders Keepers. It is a Keeper and Dynasty League podcast. It is hosted by Jordox. He has dropped his draft ranks and defenders. He's starting looking at the defenders he believes will be available for existing Keeper and Dynasty leagues, who will be available for your redraft, which should be coming up real soon. We've put the details for that also in the description. Just search for Finders Keepers. It is there. New episodes dropping every single Monday. We're so proud of Jordox, what he's doing. I know he's a part of the AFL Fantasy Fanatics team as well. So he is a busy, busy boy now when it comes to the rest of this season. You ready for a clue for who's at number 15? Can you believe it? Just 2 weeks left in the 50 most relevant. Your guessing games are getting good, or my clues getting crap. Well, there's less players. It's one of those three. We'll just have to figure out which it is. Here's how we go. This player averaged over 110 across the formats for 90% of last year. He's got some of the best frequency of 150s over the last 2 seasons of any other premium I've seen. And then one last little clue. When Bales was rattling off a bunch of names about who you could draft in the first round, he said this player's name. Maybe you want to rewind back to really shortlist it. You'll find out who that player is, though, tomorrow in the 50 most relevant.